Hey, welcome to Feisty Chess. I have white today against Banker Ice. It's got e4, e5. I'm going to go for knight f3, and we've got a Petroff Russian game. Okay, I'm going to take main line here, and I'm expecting knight c6, but he takes. Okay, so this loses a pawn for black. I think my move is queen e7. I'm pretty sure this loses a pawn with no compensation. He's supposed to either play d6, or a good way for black to gambit here is to go knight c6. Um, Stafford Gambit, made famous by Eric Rosen. But here, yeah, I go queen e2. Now he might have some kind of prepared line where he plays this as a gambit, but I'm going to take my chances. He can't move the knight, or there's lethal discoveries. If he moves the knight anywhere, I go knight c6. So now, when I recapture, my knight will be pinned. But the thing is, I'm going to recapture anyway, and now I win a pawn. So I'm supposing d4 is the main line here, just to add more protection to the knight and get a pawn for it. Okay, I'm gonna go for the queen trade too, I suppose. And I just got an extra pawn here with the queens off the board. Can't be too upset about that. And I would love to trade bishops with you. So let's do this. Simplify further. Okay. I see he's got some compensation here. I might need to give the pawn back. Castling looks good. Then he can't actually take the pawn. And that gets me out of these threats on c2, like forks on c2. So if he goes knight d4, I can just go knight c3 at that point. Same with knight b4. So I'm just going to castle. And that indirectly defends this pawn. Because if he takes, I play rook e1. And he has to defend the knight, but once he does, I just push a pawn. Okay, now I just get my knight out, and if he goes knight c2, I've got rook b1. He's got a little bit of an initiative, but I've got the center, and his initiative can't last long. And it seems like at any given point I could give up. Oh no. We'll see if this worked out. It seems like at any given point I could give up a pawn for the initiative myself. Okay, my bishop looks great on e3. I've also got bishop g5 here. Check my stats. Bishop g5 or bishop e3. I think it's better on e3. Let's do that. And now I can bring a rook to d1. Probably the f rook to d1, and the queen's rook will go on c1. And then I get my king over, maybe play knight e2. It's just a matter, it's not super exciting at this point, just a matter of consolidating, simplifying. Okay. I'm all right with this. I have my pawn defended now, and if he wants to take my bishop, we trade more pieces, and I open up a rook attack on that pawn, actually. And he's played this opening so quickly. He must just gambit this pawn routinely and count on his opponents to be careless. Okay, well, let's expand the scope of our rook here. Take some more space, play d4, guards our main center pawn, e5, and now his knight can't come back to d4. He's offering a draw. I'm going to decline that. Down a pawn. Okay, he resigned. That was a little bit of a lame game. Let's look at it. So yeah, a useful lesson in the Petrov, or the Russian defense. This is a very fine defense. This is actually, you see this at the top grandmaster levels. It's a good way to score draws with black. The main line is d6 here. Because in this line, and then, like I said, there's also a gambit line of knight c6, and you go knight takes c6, and then black has, excuse me, lots of development and initiative for the pawn he's invested. All sorts of open lines at the center. But even the Stafford gambit is not, it's pretty dubious, actually, as much fun as it is. But d6 is the line here, after which my best move is just to go here, although I'll oftentimes play a wild gambit with the knight takes f7, Cochrane gambit. But after the knight goes back to f3, then he can take safely. But taking right here, it looks like you're losing a piece, but you're not losing a piece after queen e7. And it's perfectly symmetrical. Every move has been symmetrical so far, but if you just copy white's moves as black in chess, you will eventually run into a place where you can't copy the move anymore, or at least without losing large amounts of material. So once I take, obviously he can't copy me, right? Or he's just going to lose his queen. But the knight's pinned at least, so he can do this. But now, let's pull up the analysis board and see if this is a line that's ever played by masters or strong players. Knight takes e4 is the second most common move here. It's more common than knight c6. Knight c6 is way better. Actually, a lot of these games are draws with knight takes e4. Interesting. Damiano variation. Damiano's name is on 2 openings I know of that are just not very good. Not to say that Damiano wasn't a great player back in his time, but the 2 openings that have his name, the first one, the Damiano Defense, is f6, which you shouldn't play. But there are some, it's a bad opening, but there's some tricky ways to play it. And certainly you can win your games even if you play those kind of things, if you know the opening better than your opponent. The Damiano variation here just drops a pawn. Queen takes e4, d6. Yeah, d4, the main move. Looks like f4, knight c3 are all possible. Even if I give the pawn back, even if I let him keep the pawn, I should say, I can just develop. And after, well, you probably take with the queen, I suppose. But I'll just have a development advantage as white, which is nothing unusual. But anyway, I can keep the pawn, so why not? D takes e5 is way more common. I would think that once you're up a pawn, you get the queens off the board. But actually, black wins most of the time from this position. And the move is bishop f5. Okay, I'm learning something here. Bishop f5, then c3, interesting. Bishop d3 loses both of these games for white. And that was my move. Yeah, there's two ways to guard the pawn. Knight a3 doesn't really work because it can be removed by bishop takes. And then you've got this ugly queenside, nothing left but two a-pawns after bishop takes c2. So bishop d3 seems to make sense. I wonder what the computer thinks of this position. Okay, it had a big advantage, but then as it thought more, the advantage is getting smaller for white. But still, white has an advantage. The computer wants bishop e3, which I don't see any human has played here. I went bishop d3, and now black has an advantage. So this is a nice little trappy line, but somewhere he went wrong. Knight c6. Now f4. What's wrong with castles? He can simply castle. So he gave away his advantage with knight d4. If he castles instead, I wouldn't have guessed this gives an advantage. If he castles instead, now I got to protect with rook d1. That's the only move that will protect my pawn. And now knight takes e5. Right. So he's got his pawn back, and I've got the worst structure, and he's got lots of pressure. I have to push the pawn to keep it. Oh man, but then he can just add more pressure to it. And that pawn is still pinned. Knight c6, d5, bishop takes e3, take. And now knight b4. Man, a two-pawn advantage, even though material is equal. Because these pawns are just invulnerable, and the rooks are going to come and put lots of pressure on them. Knight c2. Oh, it's mainly because he's just going to win a pawn immediately. So yeah, tactics. Okay, so in the future, how do I handle this? Bishop f5, bishop e3. Well, let's see the c3 lines. Actually, bishop b5 check. Oh, that's an interesting idea. So if you provoke that, now the bishop comes to d3, and the knight won't come to c6 where it wants to create the most threats. So that's an interesting little idea. I like that. c3 gets the pawn out of trouble, and any knight that comes here is going to be shut down from coming here or there. Knight d7. Now what? f4. Bishop f4. Castle long, and now I'm guessing knight d2, and we can castle long if we want. He's got this diagonal. Anyway, black apparently has some compensation for the pawn here. He can take, and then if I take, he brings a rook to e8, f6, knight f3, bishop c5. Now bishop e2, and he's got to take. F takes. Okay, he's got the bishops. But I like white here. I mean, this extra pawn. I can go bishop e3, and that kind of puts a cramp in my position. I don't know. I think I prefer white, just having that extra pawn. Okay, so maybe if I do this again, the key move is just d takes. Then I was thinking knight c6, and just give the pawn back. If he takes here, we just take, bishop f4, and we're going to maybe get a pawn back. Bishop f6 gives up the bishop pair. Well, after this. Anyway, okay, it's a playable line. I'm convinced it's somewhat playable for black. I played it very straightforward. Damiano's defense. If you know it, Damiano's variation of the Russian game here. If you know it, not that bad. But he didn't know it well enough, because right here, castling long would have been the move. Knight d4 throws the advantage all away. And he resigned right quick. Just didn't want to play a position like this. All right. Well, I hope the audio came through first part of the video. If it didn't, I guess I won't be posting this. But if I do, it's fun video, and stay feisty.